New maps face greater challenges than ever before. It's hard enough for them to rise above the spam and manipulation on the workshop. It's even more unlikely that they'll be officially chosen by Valve to be included in the operations. But perhaps the most difficult challenge of them all is to be accepted by the players. To show this, just look at the current competitive map pool. Of these 11 maps, only 4 of them are younger than 13 years old. And only 2 of these are community made. This is kind of weird, isn't it? Think of another game where you'd rather replay the same map than you would a new one. We pay good money for sequels and expansions that give us new maps to explore. If we were content with the same old maps over and over again, then Valve wouldn't even need to make Half-Life 3. But clearly, things are different with Counter-Strike. I think one of the reasons at least is how competitive it is. As much as it should be about enjoying the game and so on, a lot of the fun comes from winning. And you can only get so far by mastering the weapons and economy. The rest comes down to perfecting the maps. And it makes a big difference. If you want proof of this, then simply boot up a match on Office, Assault or Vertigo. Oh wait, no, it's gone. But those of you who have tried this will know what to expect and will never ever want to do it again. For the rest of you, let me tell you what to expect. You'll be put up against players of a far lower skill than yourself. But they'll put up a worthy fight simply because they know which corners to hide behind and which ones to shoot through. It makes a huge difference. You may say that it's unfair, before realising that you could learn a lot from these guys and have the best of both worlds. But even on the popular maps that we all know and love, the benefits of mastery can be massive. Watch as pro players pull off elaborate attacks on bomb sites, as smokes rain down and block vision from key locations, and as Molotovs force players out into the open. It's a sight to behold, the beautiful combination of thousands of hours of practice, condensed into just a few key seconds. When the stakes are so high, it's no surprise that the top teams would rather perfect a paltry map pool than to botch a bigger one. They go as far as to veto some of the classics from an already limited map pool, just so they can invest more time into the others. But the rest of us don't play on such a high level. What's our excuse for booting up Dust 2 for the 1000th time? For me, it's familiarity. I know the contact points, the risks in different places. Cheap kills are unlikely to catch me out. Sure, I'll still have bad games from time to time on it, but I know what to expect. At least with a map I know, it's fair game. But a new map? The best case would be if nobody else knows the map as well. At least then it's kind of fair. But the chances are, some of the other players do know the map already, and I'll be at an unfair, unfun disadvantage. When you look at it this way, is it any wonder that most of the maps we play on have been in the game since 1.6? I'd argue they're still here because of this, rather than despite it. The maps back then weren't made by pros. In fact, I think it's safe to say that they were made by people who, at the time, had a limited knowledge of the game. Far more basic than what most of us have these days. The layouts of Dust 2, Inferno, Train and Nuke probably aren't the best that Counter-Strike is capable of. They were just the best of the early ones. And they were good enough that players would rather return to them than deal with the hassle of searching for better ones. I'm not saying that these maps are unworthy. They still had to beat out the competition and have had tweaks and adjustments ever since to keep them relevant. There's no better example of this than Mappool, which has changed so much since the original that it's hardly the same map anymore. And others that used to be popular have fallen out of favour, cases where progress has perhaps triumphed over nostalgia. And despite what I said earlier, I do think that Dust 2 is the product of a divine inspiration. But I think it's safe to say that our map preferences aren't unbiased. We are heavily influenced by familiarity and risk missing out on new and exciting experiences because of it. We simply don't care enough to change things. But Valve? Oh, this is where it gets interesting. Before CSGO, we had the old server list. Most of these servers would host old favourites alongside new potentials that over time the player base would grow familiar with. But Valve's approach with CSGO has changed all of this. Unless you go to the hassle of loading up the server list, the options available will drop you into Valve-hosted servers that are running map lists of their choosing. I'm not saying this approach is better or worse, it's simply different. And it is actually worse for new maps, which will no longer have the chance to be played. But Valve have been aware of this for a long time and have done some pretty major things to try and fix it. Most notably, the operations, where the best of the workshop is bundled together and then thrown in everybody's face for a number of months to help give the map some exposure. This was rather successful at the beginning. I still remember the first few operations and their maps well. Over time I've paid less and less attention to these, seeing these new maps as a hassle to learn rather than something to get excited about. Mostly because I know that when I do choose to play them, I'll be up against people who have played them a lot more than I have. Which, like I said earlier, isn't as fun. It's a shame because a lot of these have potential to be as good, if not better than the ones already featured in the game. It's just getting over that first stage of learning them in the first place. To show I'm open-minded, I'll pick one or two of these when searching for a game. But I'll also tick the old favourites, knowing full well that the chances of canals being picked will be super low, and I always breathe a sigh of relief when cache is selected instead. I feel terrible for admitting this. As a large YouTuber, I'm supposed to be the one leading the charge into these new maps. But I just can't be bothered. You may remember the Pulse servers hosting that I did for over a year, where numerous new maps and game modes were tested. I got the feeling that this quickly became a chore for a lot of you as well, who would rather be watching instead of playing, even if you did enjoy the experience if you bothered to join. As much as I love Counter-Strike, Classic Offensive and other imaginative game modes, I feel they're up against the same sort of resistance from the community. Maybe there's nothing wrong with the way that things are. CSGO is CSGO, and if people would rather watch two elite players dueling each other around a familiar corner, why not? But what if we wanted to change? You know, like to see if it makes the game better in the long run. Let's have a look at the new maps that have already made it. What did these do right? Overpass is a Valve-made map. That's what it did right. It was made by Valve, who immediately blessed it with a premium place within the game, where it was then forced upon the player base and professionals. We didn't like it. It went through numerous changes, no doubt aided by the amount of analysis that Valve could do with it and the extensive playtesting it received. And now we do like it. Can you believe that it's almost 4 years old? Overpass is proof that new maps can work, and that we can grow to love and to appreciate them if they're shoved down our throats for long enough. But honestly, with the changes it's gone through, I genuinely think it's now one of the strongest maps in the game. It's littered with original ideas, cool grenade throws and boost spots. Then there's Cache and now Agency, both community-made maps that were first featured in the second operation of all time, Operation Bravo. These are the purest of the new maps, that were made by, and then accepted, by the people. Well done to you guys for being so open-minded. They now have what's as close to a permanent place in the game as they can get. I can't imagine CSGO without Cache now. And lastly there's Canals, which is Valve's malicious attempt to sabotage the game and everything we love about it. Or maybe it's just like Overpass, a map that they will update and refine until we do love it. It's more complicated than the maps that we're used to. I believe that this is intentional, an experiment by Valve to see if an elaborate layout can result in a higher skill ceiling and more imaginative strats. Okay, so for a new map to be accepted into the game permanently, it seems a map either needs to be made by Valve, or has to win the affections of the community from the operations, of which only 2 maps have managed so far. Which doesn't seem too hopeful for new maps, does it? Part of me would love to see what would happen if, for the next operation, Valve were to remove every other map from the game to force people to learn to love some new ones. At the end of this, we may be left with 2 or 3 that are worthy of official inclusion into the game permanently, which would be great. Of course, Valve wouldn't risk doing something this drastic, since in the meantime the community would hate CSGO and it would cause irreversible damage to the player numbers. But since the end of the last operation, they've been doing something similar, if less dramatic. Not that I'm trying to shoehorn redwoods into every video I now make, but did you know that these fantastic trees rely on forest fires to survive? Fires kill off everything else, but the redwood's thick bark allows for them to remain standing, and then to sow seeds in the now cleared space around them. In a way, a very vague way, and you'll have to use your imagination a bit, CSGO's map list is a bit like a redwood forest. The good maps are like redwoods, and the rest are just clutter, stopping new redwoods from growing. After the latest operation ended, Valve effectively set fire to the map list forest, killing rubbishy little tree maps like Vertigo, Aztec, Dust and Militia in the process. That's right, they're no longer in the game. Shed a tear for them. But where they used to stand are now spaces. Gaps for new, bigger and better maps to sprout from. Operations, it seems, aren't enough. Getting players to try out new maps actually involves complete removal of the excess, and by giving new potential maps the same status in the game as the likes of Cache and Dust 2. That's where Agency now sits, and I expect more to follow. One of the reasons for me not bothering with Operation maps was because I knew that once the operation was over, the maps would be removed from the game again, never to return. Why waste time learning these when time spent on, say, Inferno would remain relevant for far longer? Time on CSGO isn't just for short-term payoff. It's an investment into our future ability. Valve needs to reward the time we invest on new maps in some long-term way if it's to persuade us to take a rest from our old favourites. Making new maps more permanent is one such way in which this can be done. But at the same time, I don't expect a permanent place to actually be a permanent place anymore. From now on, expect the official map list to be fluid, with maps coming and going over time. By concentrating the player base into a smaller number of maps, hopefully the newer maps will get more playtime. Somewhat counterintuitively, I think Valve are more likely to remove a map if it gets played a lot and if our dislike is still vocal at the end. The important thing is that we at least give maps a chance to be good, that we consider the terrifying possibility that we might even like them, once we've learned the layout enough not to get insta-killed every round. Or at least, that's what I think Valve are doing to try and encourage you to play the new maps. But who am I to speak for them? And for you. That's why I've left this video as a question. To you. I want you to say why you prefer to play the same maps again and again, and what it would take for you to play a new one. Comment below with your reasons why. And then like and share and subscribe and follow and pay and worship and fear me. And on Twitter as well.